Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Welcoming to the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It's your host back once again to give you more updates on everything in the basketball world. Brice here to talk to you about everything that has happened in the NBA since the last time we were here, and also some college news as well. Obviously, NBA Finals has started. What a game that was last night. After the first quarter, you thought, okay, this will be a good game, and then we saw it ended. But obviously things happened on the Heat side, and that contributed also. But the Lakers were also on fire last night, so that contributes to how the game went. We have news also during the show about the head coaching situations in both LA and Philadelphia, as there starts to become some emerging candidates for both spots. Also, we're going to discuss the Doc Rivers firing, as I wasn't able to get to it on my last show, but I'll give my thoughts on why this move was made, who's to blame for this move, and talk about some things that I've read about what could have potentially added to why this move was made as well. So we're going to talk about all that here on the podcast. And just, like I said, I got to keep you guys informed. That's what y'all listen to me for. And also, y'all want to hear my opinion on what happens in the landscape, as, like I said, we're entering the home stretch. It's not that long before the season could potentially be officially over. Could be over by next week. Likely next week. And so we're savoring the bit of basketball we have left. Hopefully we go out with a good one. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and get into it. Obviously, we've got to talk about Game 1 from the NBA Finals last night between the Miami Heat and the Los Angeles Lakers. Lakers dominated the game 116-98. After the Heat were up 13 in the first quarter, the Lakers took a 3-point lead by the end of the first quarter and pretty much destroyed the Heat from there. But the story of the game is the Heat's injuries, as Goran Dragic looks like he'll be out for the rest of the playoffs for foot injury. Jimmy Butler suffered a sprained ankle, but he says he will continue to play throughout the playoffs with his ankle. Bam Adebayo banged up his shoulder even more, but he says he is committed and he's thinking he's going to play in Game 2. And so what you have right now, after such a dominating victory by the Lakers, you have a wounded Heat team. They're wounded. Their best guys are hurt. You don't know how effective Bam Adebayo is going to be at this point. Rockets probably will not return for the series. Jimmy Butler, he could play through the ankle, but we got to see how that limits him, if it limits him at all. If you look at the game from the Heat perspective, Jimmy Butler started hot, but then only finished the game with 23 points. Duncan Robinson gave him nothing. Went 0 from 3 from the three-point line. Jay Crowder gave him 12. He hit some threes early. Bam Adebayo was only able to give him 8 before he exited the game. Dragic gave him 6 before he exited the game. Hero was 14. And the story with Hero is while he was on the floor, he was minus 35. So when Hero played, that's when the Miami Heat were at their worst. So you can clearly see, based off that result, that Hero did not play that well in the game. Kendrick Nunn had, like I said, a good game, and he'll have to step up for Dragic, clearly, as we know his situation, we know his story. And one thing I think for the Heat right now that they have to figure out is how are they going to defend AD? And then what players in their reserves are they going to play that will give them the best chance to win? And I'll dive a little deeper into that, but I want to get to the Lakers. Obviously, Lakers, like I said, dominant. Anthony Davis had 34 points last night, 3 blocks. He was dominant all over the field. You saw the Heat could not guard this man. LeBron then came with 25 and 13. Caldwell Pope gave him 13. Danny Green gave him 11. Caruso gave him 10. Morris gave him 8. Kuzma gave him 3. Rondo gave him 7. And that's kind of how the Lakers win their games. AD and LeBron carry the load, scoring 60 points between the two of them, or 70. And then you get 1 or 2 guys in double digits. In this game, they happen to have 3. And then you get some guys who just all make a score here, make a play here. And that's what usually is able to get them the wins most of the time. That's what's able to get them over the hump most of the time. So for them, you know, they already came into this finals matchup as the favorite. They already came into this matchup. People knew they were the better team. That was never a question. They just played the way they know how to play. And the thing I think that really helped the Lakers last night is they started the game 10 of 16 from 3. So they were hitting threes at a clip that we usually see Miami hit threes. Now, overall, they shot close to 40% as a team. And also, another thing the Lakers usually haven't done this entire offseason, not offseason, but postseason, plus regular season, they shot 93% from the free throw line. The Lakers were considered one of the worst free throw shooting teams as a team in the NBA. Obviously, we know Anthony Davis is a guy who can shoot 90% from the line, but Rondo has issues. LeBron can have issues. You know, there are a lot of other guys are not known for being great free throw shooters, but they shot from the free throw line. They dominated the boards. They almost dominated boards by 20 boards. They had 4 more offensive rebounds, 3 more blocks, 3 more steals. You could just look from the stat line and tell they were the most dominant team on the court last night, and they played like it. So you clearly can see who has the advantages in this game and who's the better team. But Miami's a scrappy team, and they're going to continue to fight. So if I'm Eric Spoelstra, what would I do next series? Let's say Bam does play, right? But we don't know how effective he's going to be. And you got to figure out how we're going to match up with AD, how we're going to play how we're going to play the Lakers moving forward. That's going to give us the best chance to win. So if I'm Eric Spoelstra, this is what I'm looking at. Miles Leonard. Miles Leonard played last year in the Western Conference Finals for the Portland Trail Blazers. Miles Leonard is really the only true big that they have on this roster, to me. I mean, because Kelly Olynyk, to me, is more of he can shoot the 3, but that's mainly what they ask him to do for the most part. I mean, remember, overall last night, Olynyk was ineffective in his 18 minutes of play, and clearly was not in the game plan. Because when Bam got into foul trouble, they just went small with Solomon Hill and Derrick Jones. So you can clearly see he even knows that Kelly Olynyk can't be effective in this series. But if they need another key big man, Miles Leonard can do it. But people forget Miles Leonard is a sturdier guy. I'm not saying he's about to become no AD stopper. So let's shut that down right now. But he's a sturdier, stronger, especially in the upper body. We see how jacked he is on the sidelines. Let's not lie here about Miles Leonard. He has a 3-point shot, so he can still do it with Kelly Olynyk. He may not be as efficient as Kelly Olynyk, but he can shoot the 3. Remember the Western Conference Finals last year, Miles Leonard had some moments. When they put Miles Leonard in the game against Golden State, Portland did, Miles Leonard had a pretty good series against the Golden State Warriors because he was that one big man who could kind of get his way a little bit with Golden State in the front. And you saw it, especially since they didn't have Nurkic as well last year. So he can score. Like, Miles Leonard can give them some scoring, and he can at least give them another big to throw at AD. Instead of going super duper small, where now he could just jump over everybody and out rebound you. Where at least Miles Leonard, that's a big man. He truly has to fight in the paint to get rebounds and shoot on. So that would be the first change I make if I'm Eric Spoelstra. I would get Miles Leonard. He's going to have to play, especially with Bam being hurt, and you don't know how effective he's going to be. You have to have Miles Leonard in the game. Again, I'm not saying that as he's going to flip this series on its back, but you need to find better matchups. You should not be sharing Derek Jones Jr. or Solomon Hill in there to guard AD. Bring Miles in the game, see what he can do, see how he holds up. If he can give you something on the offensive end, that's good too. Like I said, he could also stretch the floor so your offense can still be just as effective as if Kelly Olynyk was in the game. Also, clearly, Tyler Hero has to play better. We know that. You don't want to be negative 35 on the floor. That's not a good stat. But the two rookies are going to be asked to do a lot in this next game. Hero has to play better. And then the undrafted rookie, Nunn, has to come in there, play big minutes for Dragic. I wouldn't be surprised if they start him if Dragic is hurt. They probably will. They're probably going to go ahead and start Nunn. They might start Hero, but I think they should start Nunn. And then these two rookies are going to be put in some spotlight, and they're going to have to play well in that spotlight. So they're going to have to make some changes there to be able to compete with Miami. And then if you want to use Solomon Hill or Derek Jones Jr. just to give people some rest, I get it. I understand it. But I just don't think they should be the first line of defense for you. You already knew LeBron was going to be a mismatch. He's a mismatch for most teams. But I think in this situation, if you use Miles Leonard, it'll give you a better chance in the front, and especially with Bam hurt. And then if your young players step up and really rise up in this next game, the Heat can bounce back and tie this game up 1-1. It's just a matter of will they bounce back? Because some teams could come out of a game like they just came out of and have their spirit broken in game one and just say, you know what? We weren't even supposed to be here. We made it here. We did what we needed to do. But that other team is just clearly better than us, and this is probably going to be what it looks like for the rest of the series. So you know what? We can play lose, have fun, and, we'll see what happens. But the way I saw Jimmy Butler looking, he's looking at it like, listen, we can play better than this. We can compete better than this, and we need to go out in the next game, even with the injuries that we have, and show that we can play better. It sounds like to me Jimmy Butler's taking this as a personal pride thing, that this Miami Heat team is not the Miami Heat team that y'all have seen this entire playoffs. This isn't the same Miami Heat team that beat Boston in 6, that beat the Bucks in 5, and swept the Pacers. This is not that same team. And so I feel like he's going to try to go out there and prove it to people and show them who the real Miami Heat truly are. Now, with that said, if we're talking about Game 2, I mean, listen, I feel like the Heat are going to come back and play better in Game 2. And something tells me I should maybe go with them to tie it up 1-1, but for me, I have to see how they play this next game. Because Eric Spoelstra's decisions will definitely make a big difference on how competitive they are in the next game. But with that said, I will still go with the Lakers to win Game 2 and go up 2-0 in the series. I think AD pretty much knows he has to dominate his matchup. If he continues to dominate his matchup, the Lakers are extremely hard to beat. And if LeBron continues to do what he does, and the supporting cast continues to shoot well from 3 and do what they do, you would have all but expectations that they're going to be able to continue to be successful and win in this series. When you saw it all over Twitter last night, people were thinking this is going to be a sweep if the Lakers play like this, because if the Lakers do play last night, this series could be over in 4. So we'll have to see what happens with the Miami Heat in Game 2. But the Lakers clearly showed they are the class of this series so far, and they're looking to continue to show that going into Game 2 because they have just one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. You saw that last night. And when their supporting cast is on and their stars are on, this is why the Lakers were always viewed as a championship team. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into the Doc Rivers firing. Whose fault was it and everything surrounding that decision. So if you want to hear all that and my thoughts, stay tuned right here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Listen up, sports bettors. This is your man Brice here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. I only endorse one sports book, and that is BetUS.com. Why, you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid. You need a sports book that offers everything, including live betting, MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Go to BetUS.com now and fill out your information. It only takes a minute. When you get to the How Did You Hear About Us box, type in my name Brice or GSMC Basketball Podcast, and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today, and don't forget to type in my name or the show name, GSMC Basketball, to get up to 150% bonus on your first deposit. That's BetUS.com.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down Game 1 between the Lakers and Heat, mainly talking about what the Heat need to do with all the injuries that they are suffering in this finals to basically combat the Lakers, who look like the most dominant team, throughout the entire playoffs, if we're being honest. And what they have to do to be able to potentially tie the series up 1-1, adjustments that Eric Spoelstra has to make to tie the series up 1-1, and just overall playing better if they're going to be able to compete with the Lakers. Because, like I said, if the Lakers play like they played last night, it really might be over already. Because they played very impressively last night and just really showed you how well put together of a team they are. So we'll have to see what happens moving on forward, I think, with the Lakers and Heat as we're going to get into Game 2. That's Friday. But now we're going to get into some news that happened. I wasn't able to cover this in my last podcast because I had just recorded it, and then the news literally broke after I got done. But Doc Rivers has been fired from the Los Angeles Clippers, a move that was rumored after they lost, but a lot of people felt like it wasn't actually going to happen. And then you come back a week, 2 later, and it happens. So now Doc Rivers is on the market again as a free agent head coach. Steve Ballmer decided to pull the trigger on him. And so people are asking why. Why was this move made? Was this the right decision? Did Steve Ballmer respond too fast, too hasty? Or is he making the best decision for the Clippers long term? So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that I've read on Doc Rivers and why that may be, what reasons that could have caused for this firing. And then I'll give my overall opinion on the situation as well. So one report that came out about Doc Rivers' firing is that Doc Rivers struggled to manage the Clippers after Kawhi and Paul George's arrival. And there are multiple people who have said different things on this report. So, per The Athletic's Joe Bada, outsiders observed that Rivers was unable to manage the demands of his new stars, Leonard and George, while simultaneously sustaining the cooperation from the old guard of the roster, mainly Williams, Harrell, and Patrick Beverley. It was also noted that the Clippers were comfortable parting ways with Rivers for multiple reasons. And I quote, "The organization ultimately determined that the locker room, as currently constructed, lacked the requisite leadership and mettle to be a true championship team. Players weren't necessarily put in the best position to unlock a better version of themselves, either with the team not always making appropriate and timely adjustments," league sources said. So obviously, from that statement alone, it sounds like the players weren't 100% confident in Doc Rivers getting the job done. If they're saying, if this, what he said from The Athletic is true, that means the players felt like when they got here, he didn't know how to handle having stars and still having to get the most out of every player on the team. And if that's the case, then that is 100% on Doc Rivers. Because remember something here. Remember before before Kawhi and Paul George got there, this same Clippers team with Danilo Gallinari and all of them took the Golden State Warriors with KD last year to 6 games. And the Clippers brought their lunch pail to every game every single time. They played hard. They played scrappy. You could tell that team was well coached. You could tell that team knew their roles. You could tell this team was in sync. And then when Kawhi Leonard and Paul George showed up, it's like all of that was gone. That identity was gone. Those lunch pails gone. Because remember, they were load managing many games. Paul George was load managing. Kawhi was load managing. And you've heard reports that, especially a guy like Montrezl Harrell in the more open, was not very happy about that because they were just like, wait, last year everybody had to grind for us to be in the position we were. Now we bring these two guys in here, and you're telling me they don't have to grind with us? Then why should I have to grind if they don't have to grind? If this is a team? So this definitely makes sense from that perspective because Doc gave them preferential treatment they shouldn't have gotten. I understand if every now and then you want to let your players have a game off, or every now and then you tell them you don't have to practice today. But from what we hear from all the reports is that Doc Rivers let this go on way too much, and then players were starting to feel some type of way about it. Because remember, everybody said this Clipper team was a bunch of dogs. They're rough, they're tough, because they felt like the team last year was a bunch of dogs. And then you had Kawhi and Paul George, who were supposedly dogs. And then you got even more dogs on the team with more talent. And then boom, they're going to be so great and scratch and claw. And then you actually look at the Clippers team, in my opinion, they look like a finesse team. They didn't seem like they were dogging for anything. They seemed like they were purring. They weren't barking. So that makes sense. But to continue, Shams Charania of The Athletic and Stadium reported on issues players had with Rivers coaching after the Clippers were eliminated from the playoffs by the Denver Nuggets, and I quote, "Rivers had several strategistic decisions that left players scratching their heads, such as the decision not to ride a bigger lineup against Nikola Jokic, or the Joker, choosing rotations that did not basically prioritize more minutes for JaMychal Green and various defensive adjustments. The team also never came together in terms of chemistry and basically just togetherness inside of the bubble." So obviously hearing that, hearing that statement, you clearly see from that perspective that the players felt like Doc was not making the right coaching decisions for them to be successful. That's a good question. JaMychal Green was a very important part of this team last year because he is a stretch big who can shoot the three. And for some reason, he got not a lot of minutes in the playoffs. But JaMychal Green can play. He would have helped in that series if for some reason they didn't go there. And we all knew about the chemistry questions and things of that sort. Because it was just kind of like, What's really going on? Why is the team not playing together? Why did it never seem like the chemistry was there? You know, you even heard Kawhi Leonard. I believe he said this after the series was over. People looked at this as a shot at Doc Rivers, as he was just basically like, we weren't always what he said was we weren't always put in the best positions when a certain situation arose to be able to combat it. And that obviously was a shot at Doc Rivers. Clearly. So, to me, it shows. And then, continuing on, it says the reported issues date back before the playoffs, noting that Kawhi Leonard expressed his unhappiness with being benched late in the first half during a February 11th game against the Philadelphia 76ers, and I quote, this is what was said. As Leonard walked towards the Clippers bench, he demonstrably gestured towards Rivers, yelling, "There's 12 seconds less, we're down 2, while throwing up his arms in disappointment at the decision to bench him so late in the half. An outward display of emotion like that was rare from Leonard. Before Leonard could sit down, Rivers retracted his decision and instead subbed out Lou Williams. Williams, who was setting up on the left block to come off a Herald screen, sauntered off the floor, pausing for a second to throw his arms up at Rivers to display his displeasure. So again, that's just a connection to maybe earlier this season why the issues arose and why these things happened. So you clearly can see that these issues have been shown throughout this season. Players have not been happy with certain decisions that are made, and I'm sure over the season it made you question, do the Clippers, do they trust Doc Rivers? Did they trust Doc Rivers? That, to me, is a big question. Because from what I'm reading, from what they're saying, it sounds like there was not a trust there. They didn't trust Doc Rivers' decision-making and his adjustments in how he handled the team. And so they started to know, I don't want to say turn against them, but like I said, there was definitely some concern. And that's why I think when the series with Denver happened, and seeing how they collapsed the way they did, it was just kind of like, it was a move that I guess you could say felt like had to be made. It had to be made. There was just no other way to get around that decision. But also, I want to get to this too, to add on to this. Also in this decision to fire Doc Rivers, Steve Ballmer talked to important players highlighted as Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and I'm sure he talked to others. And the fact that the decision was to let him go after this, it makes you wonder what was said. Because I just read to you things about what happened with the Clippers during the season, where it seemed like there was a lack of trust and belief in the coach because of certain decisions that were made, or a lack of decisions that were made. Then you talk to your 2-star players, who I have to remind you, opt out. That they can opt out after next season. They can become free agents after next season. And if they didn't want Doc Rivers to leave, and Steve Ballmer went ahead and cut and fired him anyway, wouldn't that affect them leaving? Wouldn't that be like, oh, you're going to let go of the guy we didn't let you let go? Well, I'm not staying here after this year. So it makes you wonder, were they... I'm sure they did not want to make him lose a job. But they also looked at the fact that with this team, that's a win-now team, Not that stuff Paul George said, talking about this wasn't a year, a make or bust year. Yes, it was. You can't have all that talent, do everything that you did during the regular season and say it wasn't. But this was a win now year. Steve Ballmer looked at this as a win now year. And the fact that you had those meetings with the players and then your ending result was letting him go, I'm sure Paul George, Kawhi, and some other guys that he talked to probably voiced their opinion and said, listen, Doc's good and everything, but we're going to need somebody else who can lead us to that promised land. Because based off some of these decisions, based off the things I've told you and was reported, it just felt like the players didn't believe in Doc Rivers to get them to where they needed to go. And that's why this decision was made. And now we'll see who will be the next head coach of the Clippers, which I'll talk about more later in the show. Because probably next segment, we're going to get into the head coaching, realm, because there's a lot of openings still open, a lot of prominent coaches entering them. So if you want to hear more about what's happening in terms of the Clippers head coaching situation and other head coaching situations, stay tuned right here on the GSMC podcast. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC basketball podcast. Last segment, we broke down why Doc Rivers was fired as head coach, talking about several incidents and reports coming out from what players were saying and showing behind the scenes of the Clippers and their season. Basically, to me, directly showing that there was a lack of belief in Doc Rivers from the players. Players felt like he couldn't manage the stars. It was unfair. Not everybody was held accountable. And what he was the year previously was not that same team this past year, which led to them blowing a 3-1 lead to the Denver Nuggets and not reaching expectations. They were one game away from having that LA All Western Conference final, and they blew it. Steve Ballmer had to sit there alone in the stands and watch that with his own two eyes. I'm sure that ate at him. He was probably itching to make a change. And when he had those meetings with those players, he probably got everything he needed to say to make that change. But now we're going to get into some head coaching news. As in terms of news, in terms of head coaching, we're going to get to the Clippers head coaching vacancy. But I want to get into Houston's first. Actually, not Houston's. The 76ers first. Because obviously when Doc Rivers was fired, he got calls from teams reportedly within an hour of that. So Doc Rivers was going to get a job. Doc Rivers is universally known as one of the most respected and best coaches in the NBA, regardless of what happened even in the Western Conference Finals. I mean, this past, or Western Conference semifinals, literally a week or two ago. And so a team that he has been connected to a lot in the last basically few days has been the 76ers. There have been a lot of discussions, they said, between Doc and the 76ers, and they have formally had their official meeting to be the new head coach of the 76ers. If that's going to be interesting to me, if the 76ers did hire Doc, because to me, I would be intrigued by Doc's plan for the 76ers. with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, since that's what mainly all of this circles around. For me, at least. So I would be very intrigued to see what they're looking to do, potentially. I think that Doc obviously gives the 76ers something they haven't had for a while, a very respected head coach. You can make an argument with Brett Brown being a guy who was a part of the rebuilding 76ers, the tanking 76ers, and then all of a sudden now said, okay, yeah, now we need you to get this team to a championship. That maybe the players in the 76ers didn't take him seriously enough. Maybe they didn't believe in him enough. And maybe and everybody talked about sometimes the way he coached in 76ers, how he was afraid of confrontation from time to time. And now having a guy like Doc Rivers in there, especially after hearing what you heard with the Clippers in their championship expectations, how he struggled to manage their stars, to bring him into the 76ers with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons and say, well, we need you to manage them. Again, assuming that the plan is to keep both of them there, which I'm assuming that is the plan. Now, remember, before this firing, Mike D'Antoni was the favorite. He was the guy who looked like he was going to land the job. But now that Doc Rivers has basically technically they say step down, but I still believe he was fired by the Clippers. He swiftly, surpassed Mike D'Antoni as the favorite. And so that's big to me if he goes to the 76ers, and I'm intrigued by the fit. I'm intrigued by how that would work out to me. That's very interesting to me to see how that would work. How that dynamic would work. You know? The only difference from this team to the Clippers team is that the 76ers are especially in their stars, they're very young. But relatively, they're a young team. They're not an old team. So, we'll have to see. Because we'll have to see the kind of offense Rivers brings in there to see if it can fit with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Obviously, Elton Brand has been still saying that he's not looking to trade either one. But we'll have to see if that actually can stay, as the actual situation. Like I said, we don't know what's being said in these meetings, potentially. So, that's obviously a very interesting situation. So, we'll have to see how that would work out to me. But now, if we get to the Clippers side of things, they're looking to potentially promote from within. And guess who the top assistant coach is on that staff? Ty Lue. Remember, David Blatt was fired in Cleveland. Ty Lue was promoted to head coach. Doc Rivers let go or stepped down in LA. It looks like Ty Lue, right now, by all reports, is the favorite to become the next head coach. And I honestly, to me, when I hear that, I think that would be a good move. Now, obviously, this is still early. I'm sure the Clippers, he's an early favorite. They may want to take time to interview other guys just to make sure. But right now, it feels like it may be easier for them just to go ahead and make Ty Lue the next head coach of their team. Because he's in a very strong position right now. And obviously, we can't forget Ty Lue also has an interview with New Orleans Pelicans, who also still have a head coach opening, potentially. So, but if I'm Ty Lue, if the Clippers offer me a job and the Pelicans offer me a job, I'm probably taking the Clippers just because I have the more championship-ready team. Unless he wants a situation where he has to rebuild, or not rebuild necessarily, but help a team grow and to reach the next level. And obviously, remember, he was in that locker room. He was there. He knows about everything that has happened with the Clippers because he was there right next to Rivers. Listen, I always say this with teams. I always say, when you're an assistant coach or a position coach or whatever, you know how you would coach the team. But you just listen to what the head coach says because he's basically your quote-unquote boss. And you just try to coach it to the best of your ability. But after hearing everything you heard, I'm sure Ty Lue is aware of what has happened. And I'm sure Ty Lue will not allow that to happen again. One thing that people credited Ty Lue with when he was in Cleveland was how he was not afraid to challenge LeBron James. He was not afraid to say, no, LeBron, we're going to do this instead. Remember, the perception is nobody challenged LeBron James. When LeBron says something, you do what LeBron say. Because listen, LeBron is almost like another coach on the floor. Of course you're going to take his considerations under, serious consideration. But I can't remember the particular moment, but I remember reading this report a long time ago. I want to say it was during the playoffs where LeBron wanted a particular call or wanted a particular thing to happen, and Ty Lue told him, no, we're going with what I say. And so he clearly has showed he has a backbone. So, and remember, LeBron is considered a drama queen. He was considered one of the hardest players to coach because of all the drama that comes with him and all the pressure. And Ty Lue, to me, I think handled it with flying colors. I think he handled that situation very well. And so I think coming into the Clippers situation, I don't think it's going to be overwhelming for him. And remember, Kawhi and Paul George don't have that same overwhelming personality that LeBron does. So it's not like they're going to be, overwhelming for Ty Lue. But at the same time, I think Ty Lue is very respected by so many people. Remember, even in Brooklyn, they said that if the Brooklyn Nets had hired Ty Lue, Kyrie and KD respect Ty Lue. They like Ty Lue. So he has the respect of a lot of star players in this league. People know what Ty Lue brings to the table. So I think this would be probably their best move to make right now. Because who else would you bring in for the Clippers? You can't bring in Mike D'Antoni. I don't think that run and gun. I don't know what that's going to do for the Clippers. Like, okay, the Clippers could score a lot of points. They could score a lot of points anyway. They have offensive talent, but D'Antoni don't coach defense. And this is supposed to be one of the best defensive teams in the league, which they underachieved in that department. So I don't think you want to bring him in. Ty Lue's going to coach both sides and make sure that he gets the best out of both sides of the ball for his team. And remember, Kawhi and Paul George, I feel like, are the type. They may not vocally say it, but I'm sure they might feel a little bit more trustworthy and say, hey, Ty, can we maybe look at this? Can we maybe change this? Can we maybe adjust this? And I think Ty is a guy who will take his own thoughts under consideration with it, and then make the best decision that he thinks is for the team. That's how I view Ty Lue. That's why I think Ty Lue is respected. Remember, he was fired in Cleveland after like 10, 12 games just because really Dan Gilbert didn't want him in that position. It was because LeBron wanted him in that position, and he listened to LeBron. He swallowed his pride to put Ty Lue in that position. Then when LeBron left, he was like, okay, I can get you out of here. So we can't actually realistically say Ty Lue has done a bad job anywhere. As far as we know, when he's been head coach, he's made it to the finals every year. You do realize that. So, with him knowing the roster, with him knowing what's going on, and I'm sure Ty Lue is going to change things up. There will not be as much low managing. I'm sure Ty Lue is going to say, we will take the regular season serious this year. Because I really, truly believe that's one of the reasons why the Clippers struggle was because they didn't take the regular season serious, which affected the chemistry of this team. I think he's going to hold everyone responsible, which I think is big, because that's one thing people talked about, is that they felt like not everybody was being held responsible. And I think that's what's going to raise it up the board and help them be successful moving on into the future. So I think that would be a very good decision if Ty Lue becomes the head coach. He's also interviewed with the 76ers, but obviously we have been hearing that he's not really much of a favorite in that camp. And we're going to get to this last story for the Clippers. Obviously a lot of Clippers news, right? Before we get out of here for this segment, before getting into the last segment. One of the rumors on the Clippers was a lot of people within the Clippers, team question the defensive effort from Montrezl Harrell. And it says here in this article, a common criticism from some within the team inside and outside the locker room was that Harrell's energy and effort was only consistent on the offensive end of the floor. Meanwhile, Rivers maintained publicly to the media and privately to his staff and the organization that Harrell was the better player in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. And this is probably talking about in terms of them trying to go with a bigger lineup when he made that statement. And just a quick thought on it, I mean, to me, that's not surprising. You see how many players in this league put more effort in on the offensive end and kind of just putting so-so effort on the defensive end. So to me, with Montrezl Harrell especially being undersized, playing the 5, it's not shocking, but I can understand why that still could be a problem because at least, what's one thing we say about Steph Curry? He's undersized as a guard, but he tries on the defensive end. And I think at least if they feel like you're trying, they won't be mad. But if you're telling me that players wanted a bigger lineup and the person that you were playing wasn't trying defensively, again, if you're not holding certain players accountable, that could create a big issue within the locker room and add on to another reason why Doc Rivers may have had to leave the team. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some news. Talk about an interview that Kyrie Irving did with Kevin Durant on his podcast and some very interesting comments that were made. And also other NBA news on top of that. So stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed Doc Rivers already potentially having a new job as the 76ers look to be his primary destination as he has emerged and surpassed Mike D'Antoni as the favorite to be the new head coach of the 76ers. I gave my thoughts on that. I thought that would be a very interesting match. Obviously going from Brett Brown, who maybe in some circles wasn't very respected, and obviously didn't have the same accolades that Doc Rivers has, could that potentially be the difference in the 76ers? But also seeing what happened in LA is dealing with now Embiid and Simmons in that roster's issues going to really work. And I also talked about Ty Lue being promoted from within as the Clippers are looking to promote Ty Lue as the early favorite to become the new head coach. They're going to have some interviews, but it looks like it's a very strong case that he will stay in. They will stay in-house and go ahead and make him the head coach as he knows the players, he knows the teams. He probably has seen everything unfold, and he knows what he has to do to help this team get on the right track next season and reach expectations that were set this season, really, by the requirement of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. We also talked about some Clippers questioning Montrezl Harrell's defensive effort and how that also could have maybe contributed to why Doc Rivers was also let go as well. So all that was talked about last segment, but now we're going to get to this segment. And we're going to start with some comments made by Kyrie Irving. KD just dropped a new podcast recently. It's called the ETCSs. You know, if you want to go check it out. Also, Woj posted the full audio on his Twitter. If you have him on Twitter, you can also follow him and listen to the full audio of the podcast. But he made two interesting comments we're going to touch on. The first comment was Kevin Durant's assistant, co-host on the show, or second guy on the show, had asked Kyrie about the head coaching situation. And Kyrie had a very interesting answer. He said, well, I don't really think we need a head coach. KD could be head coach. I could be head coach. Now, remember something now. Kyrie says some pretty interesting things. Kyrie has said a lot of very interesting things these last couple of years that you just kind of scratch your head, just be like, okay, people have been questioning the thinking that Kyrie kind of has, because it's just like, okay, it is interesting to hear him come out and say, well, we don't need one, and you just hired a new one, but you're saying you don't need one. And actually, in this interview, he actually talked about his relationship with Nash. And I'll read that quote to you here. And he said this: Steve is great, and I have a relationship with him that's going to build over time. Bro, Steve don't know me from anything he's heard or he's heard someone else. We've worked out one time in 2014, and it's grown as just a respectful relationship from afar. I saw him at the Hall of Fame 2 years ago, gave him a big hug, and now he's the head coach. And I think it's also going to change the way he sees coaches. So, it's weird that Kyrie, in a way, that could be taken as he's not very, I guess, quote unquote, excited about Steve Nash being the new head coach, if he's saying that they don't need one. Like, it's just, we've questioned things Kyrie said in the past when it came to the team. Like, why would you say that? Why would you throw this person under the bus? And for him to come out and say something like that, I'm sure rose some eyebrows, because Kevin Durant on that same podcast, obviously, since it's his podcast, came out and said, I respect him. I think he's going to bring great knowledge. I think I'm excited to get working with him. But then you got Kyrie, your second star, saying, I mean, we don't really need him, and I don't really have much of a relationship in terms of personal with him, but it's going to grow, and we'll see what happens. So, Kyrie just says some very, Kyrie always be saying just some interesting stuff, man. Kyrie, man, he is not afraid to say things that is going to cause some controversy, and listen, I don't want you taking it like I'm saying that he thinks Steve Nash was a horrible hire, but it sounds like that he feels, it almost feels like Kyrie always likes to think outside the box. He always likes to think, we don't have to do the traditional way. We could do something different from the traditional way and still be just as successful. That's how Kyrie comes off to me. Like, we can do something different than what the usual is. And with the talent we have, we can just all collab together and really be able to coach ourselves. But we'll have to see if that potentially affects the relationship between Steve Nash and him this season. And then another thing he said on the podcast, which some people are taking as a shot at LeBron James. He said when playing with KD, he said, this is the first time in my career I can look at a guy and say he can make that shot too. And if you're wondering what that means, Kyrie is known as a big shot maker, a guy who makes big shots in the clutch, the guy who made the clutch shot in the NBA Finals in 2016. He basically said for the first time in his career, Kevin Durant is the first player he can look at and say he can do the exact same thing I can do. So obviously a lot of people look at that as a shot at LeBron James, because you basically just kind of said, I don't think LeBron could make those same shots, or he can make the big shot. So obviously some people looked at that as a very big shot at LeBron, because obviously he's played with LeBron. And obviously we know about the relationship in Cleveland, how he did not like being considered this Robin, this guy under LeBron. We remember that famous interview that people feel like may have added to why he left Cleveland, when a reporter asked him, how do y'all view LeBron as a parental figure? And he was just like, I have a dad, first of all, but yeah, I mean, he's a good person to play with. And so it's interesting that he would say something like that. You can clearly tell on this podcast he was very open, and he was very Kyrie. He was very Kyrie. That's all I can really say about that. This was a very Kyrie Irving-ish type of show in terms of things Kyrie Irving would say. Here's the thing about that statement to me. I think most people know when it comes to a big shot that you need. LeBron has never been considered a guy who you, with 3 seconds left, you need a three, you give it to LeBron, he makes it. Like, he can make the shot, clearly. LeBron has done it before, multiple times. But he doesn't have that same reputation as a Kyrie Irving and even a Kevin Durant, which is why I can understand why he made that statement, because he's saying, I don't think he was slandering LeBron. I feel like he was basically just saying, LeBron can make that shot, but we all know LeBron isn't a guy that you always depend on to make that shot all the time. Where it feels like Kyrie, you always have the utmost confidence he can make that clutch shot. KD, you have the utmost confidence he can make that clutch shot. What's one thing we've been critical of LeBron is, especially in the LeBron versus Jordan debate, is that people say LeBron is not as clutch as Michael Jordan. And he doesn't make the big shots or the big play down the stretch sometimes that they can make to win games. And so so that's a way to look at that comment. Because like I said, a lot of people universally may not view LeBron as a clutch shot maker. Obviously, he can make a shot in the clutch. Clearly, if LeBron's on your team, you definitely have him involved in that last play, either as the main shot guy or a guy who can make a play for another teammate. But in terms of just, hey, LeBron, get us a bucket. You got 6 seconds, get us a bucket. You would probably take Kyrie and KD before you take LeBron in a lot of NBA circles. So it's not that crazy to think about, realistically. Let's be honest. It's not crazy to think about. So I think, obviously, like I said, that comment can be looked at as a shot, but I don't think we need to look at that too deeply and think, oh, wow, he's really just going after LeBron again. We're going to get into the story here. So obviously we know the NBA season was pushed back to at least Christmas, if that was the earliest they could start. Well, Adam Silver made a comment about the NBA season, and he said the season right now is more likely to start in January than December. This came from a press conference Adam Silver held prior to Wednesday's Game 1 during the NBA Finals and discussed a potential timeline for the 2020-2021 campaign. And Silver basically was just like, yeah, it's more likely we'll start in January. Also, Silver is still hopeful that there will be fans at games because of rapid testing, but obviously it's still too soon to commit to anything. Because obviously we know coronavirus is still a very big thing in today's world, and nothing has changed about the virus. But obviously that gives them, pushing it back to January, obviously more time for the players to rest, and also more time to potentially see where we are in 3-4 months and see if maybe the virus has maybe changed trajectory. Or like he said, if testing is available at a rapid pace, we can now be more safe and allow fans to come to the games. So that would be very interesting. Obviously, some people were wondering about a bubble next year. Adam Silver resisted that idea. He wasn't. Also, even though they're going to look into it, I'm sure Adam Silver knows they don't potentially want to do another bubble. They want to play in the team's arenas at least. So if they can't have fans, you definitely could see empty arena games potentially. Even though the bubble at Walt Disney World Resort has been very successful for the NBA, Adam Silver is not necessarily trying to keep players there. Because listen, you heard all about the players, how they've struggled with the lifestyle. Because, just being stuck in one place for 2 months, that's rough. Listen, teams that got eliminated from the playoffs, of course you wanted to keep going, but at the same time it was also a relief. Because it was just like, oh, we can finally travel and do what we want to go do and see our family and just be free again and really enjoy having freedom after being somewhere for a month, 2 months potentially. So we're having to see. But right now, Adam Silver is hoping they don't have to return to that bubble environment. And then last quick story before we get out of here for the day. Last show, I reported that Victor Oladipo, it was reported that he's looking to maybe see a way out of Indiana this offseason, where Victor Oladipo has responded to those reports and saying he doesn't know where those reports are coming from and he is a Pacer. So obviously we know this could be the typical, I got to go out and say I'm not looking for this. Because like I said, Oladipo to me is not a guy who seems like someone who would go out into the public or leak information to the public and say, I want to get out of here. He just doesn't seem like that kind of player. So it's interesting to me that report came out, you know. And so, listen, I guess we'll have to see when the offseason comes what happens. Because, listen, once a report gets like this gets out, I'm sure teams might sit here and say, hey, if he is even thinking about leaving, and especially if he's not going to be a prominent player on Indiana in the future, in terms of his future plan, in terms of Indiana's future plans, that might need to be a call we make to the Pacers to see if maybe we can acquire a guy like Victor Oladipo who can be an all-star level player. But that's all the time we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again, letting me be part of your day here, talking about all things basketball. Obviously, we had a lot of things to unpack today. Also, guys, whatever platform you're choosing to listen to us on, leave a review, rate us. All of that is important. Definitely let me know how I can be better as a host. Also, don't forget to also follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball so we can interact and talk about all things happening in the basketball world. This is your host, Brice Lewis, signing out, saying, have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.